The death of Jennifer Fairgate. June 3, 1995. In Oslo, Norway. Just before 8 p.m. A security guard of the Radisson Plaza Hotel ignores the Do Not Disturb sign on room 2805 and knocks on the door. Suddenly, from inside the room, a gunshot rings out. The security guard hides. Unsure of what to expect, and assuming a shooter would exit the room, as it was the only way in or out. He waits. But no one comes out. He then goes downstairs to the security station and informs the head of hotel security. The head of security races up to room 2805. He knocks and states who he is. But there is no response. He uses his security card to enter the room. The electronic lock opens, but he realizes the door is also locked from the inside. When he opens the door, he is met with a strong and unpleasant smell. Inside, it is dark. But he sees a woman in an abnormal position. Her legs were off of the bed like she was sitting, but she was laying down. He calls out, but the woman does not respond. He realizes she is dead. The Radisson SAS Plaza Hotel was, and is, the preeminent hotel chosen by tycoons, politicians and movie stars. On May 31, 1995, at 10:44 p.m., a young woman arrived at the front desk of the Plaza Hotel to check in. She spoke English with a German accent and said her reservation was under the name Jennifer Fairgate. The last flight of the night into Oslo had just arrived, and there was a large group of anxious guests waiting to get checked in. Desk clerk Sasha Anandsen finds the reservation. It is for two people, Jennifer and Louis Fairgate. The young woman appeared to be alone, although the lobby was very busy, and Louis may have been nearby. This was the busiest time of night. Front desk clerk Sasha Anandsen didn't ask for ID or a credit card. Anandsen's supervisor, Evie Giertsen, saw Jennifer Fairgate with a man. He had dark hair and looked between 35 to 40 years old. A short time after checking in, Jennifer Fairgate returned to the front desk to exchange money. Some of the hotel employees see her near the man believed to be Louis Fairgate, but others do not see him. The next morning, just after 8:30 a.m., Jennifer uses her keycard to enter her room. Just before 1 o'clock that afternoon, two members of the housekeeping staff went into room 2805 to tend to their usual duties. Only one pillow was used, and the second duvet was neatly folded and set aside. They couldn't help but notice this, because initially they supplied the room for two guests, 2 sets of towels, 2 robes, 2 sets of toiletries, and 2 sets of bed linens. While working on the room, the employees also noticed a pair of shoes, which caught their attention because they thought they were very stylish and hip. Much of the room was unusually clean. It appeared to be unused. The same day, Jennifer returned to the front desk to extend her reservation to Sunday. And she was given 2 new keycards. Strangely, again, she was not asked for her credit card information. Later that day, the front desk sent a message to the television in her room, requesting that she contact them in order to provide them with her credit card. This message would appear across the TV screen, and it would only go away if the guest watching the TV uses the remote control to acknowledge it. The message was not acknowledged all day. It wasn't until the next day, at 8:50 a.m., that the message was acknowledged in the room. However, Jennifer Fairgate did not go down to the front desk and provide her credit card. Later that same day, a member of the housekeeping staff crossed paths with Jennifer in the hallway of the 28th floor. Jennifer said good morning to her in English. Then Jennifer went into her room and hung the Do Not Disturb sign on her door. Just after 11 a.m., one of the 2 keycards is used to enter the room. It is not known who it was. It may have been Jennifer, returning from an outing. It may have been her companion, Lewis. On Friday, just after 8 p.m., Jennifer ordered room service. She orders a simple meal of bratwurst and potato salad. Approximately 30 minutes later, an employee delivers the order to Jennifer. Jennifer opened the door to let the server into the room. The food was placed on the table, which was absent of any personal effects. The server couldn't help but notice how clean and undisturbed the room was. It seemed as if it wasn't used or lived in at all. The bed was obviously untouched from when housekeeping prepared it. The employee also noticed a wheeled suitcase and made the assumption that Jennifer was a flight attendant, because flight attendants often stayed there and used the same sort of suitcase. Jennifer handed the room service attendant a tip, a 50 kroner note, which was an unusually large amount. Later that night, Jennifer watched a pay-per-view movie. The next day, just before 9 p.m., the front desk sent another message to the television, asking Jennifer to come down and give her credit card. Again, the remote control in the room was used to acknowledge the message. But, again, neither Jennifer or Lewis went down to the front desk. At this point, the front desk cashier decided to send another employee up to the room. A few minutes later, that employee returned, confirming that the Do Not Disturb sign was still up, and they did not knock on the door. It was decided to ask hotel security to go up to the room. Security team member Evan-Armas went up to the room and knocked on the door. After a beat, he hears the distinctive sound of a gunshot. He raced to the elevator and went downstairs. He tells his supervisor what happened. The security team contacted police. At 8:04 p.m., the head of hotel security went up to the room. He cautiously approached the door, carefully observing and listening. Nothing seemed amiss. But was there a killer still inside? He knocked on the door, announcing himself loud and clear. But there was no response from inside. He used his security keycard to gain access to the room. As he unlocked the door, he noticed it was double locked, meaning it was locked from inside, not just by the electronic lock. And in all likelihood, whoever fired a gun was still in the room. As he entered the room, it was difficult for him to see. The television was on, but all of the lights were turned off. As he slowly walked down the hallway, he announced himself. Still, no one answered. He crept deeper into the room. Then, he saw a woman laying back, in an awkward position, on the edge of the bed. He called out to her. But she didn't move. He yells to her again. But she does not respond. Suddenly, he smells what he later referred to as an acrid smell. He leaves the room and has an employee call the police. The police began to investigate the scene. Jennifer Fairgate was laying down, with her shoes touching the ground. And in her hand was a gun. She was dressed in a black dress, with black stockings and black shoes. On her wrist was a Citizen Aqualand diving watch. Her hand and the gun were resting on her chest. She was holding the gun backwards, with her thumb on the trigger, and her fingers wrapped around the backside. The gun was a Browning high-power 9mm. Jennifer had a bullet wound in the middle of her forehead. Investigators discovered a bullet hole in a pillow on the bed. It went all the way through the mattress, and the slug was stuck in the floor. They theorized that this was a test shot. The clip from the Browning 9mm contained 7 more rounds, meaning that the clip must have been full. That would mean Jennifer fired a round through the pillow, flipped it over, then sat at the edge of the bed and shot herself. When investigators removed the gun from her hand, she still had a tight grip on it. They had to carefully remove her thumb from the trigger. And when they did, they heard it click. This would indicate that the trigger was not completely released after firing a round. She pulled the trigger with her thumb, and her hand fell to her chest. There was a profuse amount of blood on the bed. Blood splatter on the nightstand, and on the wall. On the floor were the 2 9mm shell casings. Sitting next to the bed was an attaché case. Shockingly, it did not contain papers. It contained 25 more bullets. That's a total of 34 rounds. Investigators came to the conclusion that Jennifer Fairgate had checked into the 5-star hotel to spend her final days alone and in luxury, and with the explicit intention of ending her own life. Although investigators were left with many unanswered questions. Her hands did not have any gunshot residue or blood on them. Experts find this very curious. It is possible to fire a gun and get an untraceable amount of GSR on your hands. But the probability drops if you fire the gun twice, as investigators believe Jennifer did. Investigators were struck by another mystery when they discovered that the gun Jennifer was holding had the serial number removed. The Browning high-power 9mm was a widely used gun. It was well liked for its simplicity and reliability. It was commonly carried by military and police all over the world. It is somewhat common for criminals to file off serial numbers so that the guns can't be traced. But, in this case, it was removed with acid. If it is done properly, this method is much more effective than filing the numbers off. When the numbers are applied at the factory, it changes the density of the metal beneath them. To see the serial number, Investigators use acid etching, which will eat away the metal at different rates, thus revealing the manufacturer's serial number. By removing the numbers with acid, it negates investigators' ability to use the acid etching process. This could only mean the numbers were removed by a professional, someone with knowledge and expertise in a very specific and illegal activity. The only information they were able to get from the gun is that it was made in 1990 or 1991. Crime scene technicians found Jennifer Fairgate's fingerprints throughout the room, but they were not found on the gun or the bullets. If Jennifer Fairgate had checked into the hotel with the sole purpose of ending her life, why would she leave her fingerprints scattered around the room, but wipe them off of the gun and the bullets? A Norwegian crime scene technician explained that the backwards way Jennifer held the gun would not necessarily leave fingerprints. However, the lack of prints on the bullets is very strange. It is deliberate. But what purpose would that serve in a suicide? Many would assume that after firing the gun, recoil would cause it to fly out of Jennifer's hand. However, this could be explained by what is called postmortem spasm, which is a muscular stiffening that occurs at the moment of death. An example of this would be in cases of drowning. Victims are sometimes found holding grass, weeds, or roots. It is rare, but it is possible. Investigators noted that the room service Jennifer ordered the previous day was only partially eaten and left on the table near the window. This is significant because, when the autopsy was performed on Jennifer, the partially eaten meal was found undigested. That would mean that she died the same day that she ate. The question is, did she order room service, then wait to eat it until the next day? Or did she die the day before she was found? The day before hotel security heard gunshots. The mystery deepens when investigators examine the clothes in her room. She had one shirt, one sweater, 4 bras, 4 pairs of underwear, and 4 jackets. They did not find any pants or skirts. As strange as it seems to not have any clothes to wear on her legs, it gets even stranger. The tags on these clothes were removed. There was also a light travel bag, the attaché case, and a bottle of men's cologne. There were not any personal care products, like shampoo or a toothbrush. And there was no makeup. Yet Jennifer was wearing eyeliner. It appeared that the shower was used. A robe was worn, and a towel was on the floor, next to the shower. The shoes housekeeping noticed on Thursday were gone. The suitcase Jennifer had with her when she checked in was also gone. The table had 3 empty soda bottles. And strangely, a newspaper that belonged to another room. It was for room 2816, which was across the hallway. Investigators were able to retrieve a fingerprint from the newspaper bag. Strangely, they did not question the guest in room 2816. Nor did they check the fingerprint in their identification system. An ironing board was leaning against the wall. And an iron was sitting on the luggage stand. The hotel had no record of Jennifer requesting these items. At the time, it was not common practice to provide these items to every room. The jacket Jennifer was wearing the night she checked in was also on the luggage stand. A few important items were mysteriously absent from the room. Investigators did not find any form of personal identification. They did not find a driver's license or a passport. Besides the few pieces of clothing There were no personal objects whatsoever. There weren't any tickets for the train or the airport. There weren't any credit cards or cash. Why were they missing? Were they stolen? If so, who took them? And why? Maybe Jennifer didn't even have them, to begin with. As the discrepancies added up, and more questions were raised, investigators worried that this might be more than the sad story of a woman ending her own life. The room was originally reserved for 2 people, Jennifer and Louis Fairgate. There was no actual evidence of a man staying in the room. The only information investigators had about Jennifer was what she had written on the check-in card. The home address she provided was 0748 Rue de l'Oste, Berlin, Belgium. Investigators discovered that address does not exist. Then, they attempted to call the phone number she wrote, but were surprised to learn that it was out of service. Investigators decided to check the phone records of her hotel room. As it turns out, she made 2 calls to Belgium phone numbers. Amazingly, they too were out of service. Yet another dead end. When Jennifer made her initial reservation, she said she worked for a Belgian company called Service. Investigators attempted to locate contact information for the company, only to find that it did not exist. Investigators had virtually no information about Jennifer Fairgate. They were unable to locate her next of kin. The company she claimed to work for did not exist. The man she reserved the room with was nowhere to be found. She had no verifiable identification. The phone numbers she provided did not work. There was no evidence that a woman called Jennifer Fairgate existed. Interpol, the international police, were unable to find any record of her. She simply did not exist. Who was Jennifer Fairgate? It would seem unlikely that she accidentally wrote down the wrong phone numbers, the wrong company, and the wrong address. Upon closer inspection of the check-in card, it seems possible that the information she provided was hastily written down, and she may have even accidentally written down the wrong information. But why did she misspell her own last name? As investigators continued to piece together the puzzle of information they had, a picture began to emerge. Whoever Jennifer actually was, she did not want to be found. But the question is why? The only option for investigators was to look into the information they had. One such piece of evidence was Jennifer's watch. It was a Citizen, made in Japan. They were able to find that it was 3 years old. But there was no record of who sold it, or where. They even looked into the batteries from the watch, but there were millions of them produced. There was no way to track where or when they were purchased. Scored into the battery was a W and 3.95. It is common practice for watchmakers to put their initial and the date the batteries were changed on the batteries. But there was simply no way to track down the watchmaker. Next, investigators examined the attaché case. It was made by a company called Braun Buffel. In 1995, they did not have any stores in Norway or Belgium. They did, however, have many stores in Germany. The attaché case Jennifer had was priced between $600 and $700. The same bag that contained 35 rounds of 9mm ammunition. One of the few articles of clothing in the room was a woman's blazer. This was the only article of clothing that had a tag on it. It was made by a company called René Lazare. Again, they did not have any stores in Norway. But they did, in Germany. Jennifer Fairgate had an expensive designer bag, nice clothes, a $500 watch, and tipped very generously. She must have had money. But there wasn't any found in the room. One theory was that it was the last of her money, and she wanted to use it and give it away before she took her own life. But why was she lying about where she lived? Why did she make 2 phone calls to numbers that were not in service? Next door was room 2803. During Jennifer's stay, it was unoccupied. On the other side of that was room 2801. At the time Jennifer was found, the guests staying there were not in the hotel and told police they'd never seen or heard anything out of the ordinary. The guests across the hall and to the left, in room 2806, were Reidar Hogstad and his wife. They told police they hadn't seen or heard anything. Next to Jennifer's room, in 2807, were Werner and Ruth Sobrist. They too were unaware of the violence and mystery next door. At the other end of the hall, in 2818, the guest said she was woken up by a door closing in the middle of the night. There is no way to know if this is related to the incident, especially when considering the other guests hadn't heard anything, including 2 gunshots. Directly across from Jennifer's room was 2804. The guests that stayed in this room checked in Friday and checked out Saturday morning, hours before Jennifer was discovered, and was therefore never questioned by police. This guest was from Belgium and was in Oslo for a business trip. Investigators were puzzled by the mysterious inconsistencies, missing items, and numerous unanswered questions. But given all of the evidence and lack thereof, they decided to rule the questionable death a suicide. When the investigation was closed, the unknown woman was buried in an unmarked grave. The few personal belongings she had were kept in evidence for a year, in the hopes that family or friends would claim her, in the hopes that someone, somewhere, would be able to help police understand who she was, why she used a fake name, why she took her own life. Investigators began to speculate about why this woman would check into a luxury hotel under a fake name. Was she hiding? Why would she hide? Initially, the evidence pointed to a suicide. But when investigators looked deeper, it did not add up. They theorized that she was in fact murdered. Maybe she knew her assailant. Maybe she didn't. There was a struggle. They fought for control of the gun. As they grappled for their lives, it fired and went through the pillow. Suddenly, her attacker got the better of her, put the gun against her head. All of a sudden, there's a knock on the door. Jennifer tries to scream for help. But before she does, her attacker pulls the trigger. Security guard Evan-Armas hears the shot and hides in the hallway. Jennifer lays awkwardly on the edge of the bed. The murderer places the gun in her hand, then quietly sneaks over to look through the peephole. They see Evan-Armas running away, and they simply walk away, leaving no evidence of their presence. Even if that is what happened, why did she check in, using a fake name? Who was this woman? Investigators theorized that this woman was a female escort, a prostitute. That might explain why she was gone from the room for 24 hours. It would also explain why she used a fake name, why she had a lot of money and expensive things, but no credit cards. Perhaps her death was the result of an encounter with a dangerous client. One problem with this premise is that when security entered the room, the door was double locked. The electronic lock works automatically every time the door closes. But in this instance, the additional lock was also engaged, which needs to be done manually from inside. The only way in or out of room 2805 was through that door. Escaping the room, then locking the door manually from inside, might seem impossible. But, in actual fact, it is absolutely possible. Realistically, all it would take is a steady hand and a piece of string. Still, there was no evidence to support this theory. One of the stranger aspects of the incident is a detail that is often overlooked. The Oslo Plaza is a 5-star luxury hotel. As such, accommodations are priced accordingly. How is it possible that this woman was able to check into a room without providing valid identification or some form of payment? When she checked in, she indicated that she would be paying cash, which is of course perfectly legal. However, she did not provide a cash deposit, which would have been standard policy at any hotel that accepted cash payments. She checked in on Wednesday night, but her lack of any kind of payment wasn't discovered until Friday night. That's when the front desk clerk sent her a message on the TV in her room. At one point, she even called the front desk and extended her stay. This would have been the perfect opportunity to ask for some kind of payment. But again, it went unnoticed. Investigators struggled to explain the multitude of discrepancies and anomalies. The prevailing theory about this mysterious woman and the baffling circumstances of her death is that she was a spy. Is it possible that she did not give a cash deposit or credit card because she bribed the front desk clerk? Is it possible that she told him she was hiding from someone and couldn't use her credit card, or she'd be found? Maybe that was true. Maybe she brought a gun and extra bullets because she feared for her life. Maybe that's why she used a fake name and only had a few personal possessions. But why didn't anyone come forward to claim her as family or friend? Maybe she was estranged from her family. Maybe she simply didn't have any living relatives. But that doesn't explain why she had a gun that had its serial number professionally removed. It doesn't explain why the labels from her clothes were removed. It doesn't explain why some of the items she had when she checked in were missing. As it turns out, many of these peculiarities have a common thread. Espionage, or the practice of spying, for the purpose of gaining political or military information, is well documented throughout all of human history. In America, during the Revolution, General Washington established spy rings to collect data, infiltrate the British Army, and sabotage their efforts. In World War II, espionage became a crucially important tactic. The British government created the Special Operations Executive, or SOE. But much of what we know today as special intelligence or spycraft was developed during the Cold War. During World War II, the British would send covert agents to continental Europe. But in order to successfully pose as locals, they needed to wear clothes in the same style as the people of that city or village. They bought clothes from refugees to use the fabric and copy the way they were made. If so much as a stitch was wrong, or a collar cut the wrong shape, it could cost them their lives. In some regions, the men sported mustaches, but in some they did not. They meticulously replicated every detail, down to the way a button was sewn, and how hair was combed. During the 1950s and 60s, the Cold War intensified. Intelligence agencies expanded, and so did their responsibilities. Most of the Cold War was fought through intelligence. Neither the USSR or the United States wanted to engage in a hot war. Both sides were nuclear powers, and if one side decided to use them, the other would have to respond in kind. This theory was referred to as mutually assured destruction, a scenario which neither side was willing to accomplish. Information became the weapon. Sabotage became the goal. Just as in World War II, spies needed to blend in and wear the clothes of the region. An old trick of the trade was to remove clothing labels. That way, it's much more difficult to track down where they were purchased. And more importantly, by whom. If someone is suspected of being a spy, every detail of their life will be scrutinized. If anything, even down to the finest detail is amiss, it could compromise their mission and put their life in jeopardy. Having a foolproof backstory is crucial. Another important element of intelligence work is weaponry. Handguns are perhaps the best kind of weapons in that particular line of work. They are easy to acquire, they are easily hidden, and they are extremely effective. They are, however, a potential liability for a spy. Every gun has a serial number, which can be traced to the manufacturer, and then to legal sales. The sale or purchase of a gun that has been blemished by filing away the serial number is far too easily had. Fortunately, it is still possible to recover a filed number by a crime lab's acid etching process. For criminals and secret agents alike, the history of a weapon being uncovered could be disastrous. The illegal practice of removing serial numbers by use of acid became the remedy. When done by an accomplished professional, it is not possible to recover any sign of a serial number. Is it possible that the woman claiming to be called Jennifer Fairgate developed a complete cover story, removed the tags from her clothes, and acquired a handgun with the serial numbers removed, so she could end her own life in complete anonymity? Or is it more likely that she was a covert agent, using the tricks of the trade to do her handiwork? But something went wrong. She was found out. And she paid the ultimate price. Why would there be a spy in Oslo, Norway, in 1995? To understand, we must again return to World War II. In 1945, at the end of the war, Germany was divided into 4 zones. Each zone was occupied by a different Allied power: the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. The city of Berlin itself was also divided into 4 sections. The east became the Soviet sector. The Soviet Union began to emerge as a global force that was ideologically opposed to the other superpower nations, each of which attempted to exert their influence around the world. Germany became a focus of the Cold War. Divisions between East and West grew. And in 1949, Germany formally split into 2 independent nations: West Germany, allied to the Western democracies, while East Germany, allied to the Soviet Union. In 1952, the East German government closed the border with West Germany. On the night of August 12, 1961, a wire barrier was constructed around West Berlin by East Berlin. In short order, the wire was replaced by a 6-foot-high, 96-mile-long wall of concrete. Guard towers were constructed and manned by East German officers, armed with machine guns. In 1947, the Soviet military administration in Germany created an organization of East German police called Commissariat 5, or K5. Their mission was to conduct surveillance of individuals in East Germany, but especially of East German government leaders. K5 was a branch of the Soviet Union's secret intelligence agency, KGB. In 1950, East Germany established the Ministry for State Security, commonly known as the Stasi. The goal of the Stasi was to know everything about everyone. They had a vast network of agents, collaborators, and assets. Their annual budget is estimated to have been $1 billion. In November of 1989, the spokesman for East Berlin's Communist Party announced citizens were free to cross the border. On November 9, an enormous crowd gathered at the wall, along with television crews from all over the world. The guards at the border allowed the crowds to move freely, for the first time since the wall's construction. A new era in world history had begun. In 1990, the Stasi were officially disbanded. East and West Germany reunited to be a single nation. East and West Berlin were reunited into a single city, and again became the capital of United Germany. This triggered the collapse of Soviet regimes in other countries. On December 25, 1991, the leader of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, resigned, and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics dissolved. The KGB became the Federal Counterintelligence Service, or FSK. The Cold War ended shortly after the Berlin Wall came down. The states that made up the Soviet Union became independent nations. They held free elections and voted out communist regimes. At the same time, the Russian Soviet Socialist Republic became the Russian Federation, and their special intelligence agencies continued to operate in much the same fashion as it did during the Cold War. They had secret agents scattered across the United States and Europe. They continued political warfare, employing programs of disinformation, sabotage and destabilization. Recently, the mystery woman was exhumed. Investigators were able to get DNA samples and determined that she was of East German descent. The fact that in the years since her mysterious death, no one has come forward to claim her, is very telling. It was and is common practice to not acknowledge someone as a secret agent. It is believed that Jennifer Fairgate was a Russian spy. A woman checked into a luxury hotel without paying, without identification, and using a fake name. A few days later she was found shot dead. The door was locked from the inside. Her companion may not have existed. The gun used had the serial number professionally removed. Her clothes had no tags. She didn't have credit cards or cash. No one claimed her, or knew her. She lied about her job, and where she lived. It seems a lengthy and arduous process to hide her real identity in order to commit suicide. But it is certainly possible. She may have taken these measures because she was a professional escort, and the potential dangers involved. She may have been estranged from her family, or hiding from her partner, and had no desire to be found. The one theory that seems to take into consideration all of the strange and mystifying details is that she was a spy, working for Russian intelligence, with a backstory, a weapon, and a mission. But it didn't go as planned. And in the end, she paid the ultimate price.